"You're fired." The words hit me like an unexpected lightning strike, echoing through the nearly empty cafe where I had spent the last 3 hours cleaning tables, wiping counters, and hoping no one would notice how exhausted I was. I, Emily Carter, 24, had been working double shifts just to keep the lights on, and now I stood frozen, my hands still wet from the rag, staring at Mr. Whitman's stern face as he waved me toward the door. Rain tapped against the windows, each droplet sounding like a countdown to my failure, my stomach twisting as I gathered my bag and tried to steady my shaking legs. The door swung open, and in the shadow of the overcast afternoon, he appeared, tall and impossibly composed, dark hair slicked back, tailored suit hugging a frame that suggested discipline and command. Nathan Blackwood, 35, and the kind of man whose presence demanded silence before he even spoke. He didn't say a word at first, just scanned the cafe, his eyes lingering on me long enough that I felt both exposed and strangely noticed. Then, without breaking his gaze, he turned slightly toward Mr. Whitman and in a calm voice that carried unmistakable authority, declared, "I'm buying this place. Everyone step aside." My heart stumbled. My pulse raced in a way I hadn't felt in months, caught between awe and disbelief, between fear and the hint of relief that anyone, might finally take control of this chaos. Mr. Whitman sputtered, opening his mouth to protest, but Nathan's glance silenced him, the room shrinking around us as if every inch of space now belonged to Nathan alone. I felt my feet move automatically, stepping back as he approached, his shadow falling across the counter like a shield, and a strange warmth flickered through my chest even as panic gripped my stomach. "I was just doing my job," I whispered, trying to sound brave, though my voice trembled, and he nodded once, a small acknowledgment that he had heard me but was focused on the bigger picture, on protecting what was his now, whether I fully understood it or not. Rain streaked down the windows, making the world outside blur into a watercolor of grays and muted lights, and I realized, for the first time, that in the midst of being powerless, I was being watched, noticed, and, somehow, defended. Nathan didn't need to shout, didn't need to demand, his presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere, to quiet the murmurs of the few remaining patrons, to put a stop to the manager's futile protests. And as he stood there, just a few feet from me, I felt an odd mix of fear and an inexplicable sense of safety, the kind that comes when someone powerful and unyielding takes notice of someone small, promising silently to intervene, to control, to shield, to own, and I knew in that instant that nothing would ever be the same for this cafe, for Emily Carter, or for the way I would look at Nathan Blackwood from now on, because the moment he pointed at me, the storm outside and the chaos inside the room, everything else faded into a single, undeniable truth: I belonged under his watch, whether I wanted to admit it yet or not. The moment Nathan Blackwood took control of the cafe, the tension in the air shifted like a tangible current, stretching from the front counter to the back tables where the few remaining customers watched silently, unsure of how to react to the sudden presence of someone who clearly commanded respect and attention. I, Emily Carter, felt a strange mixture of disbelief and relief as Nathan moved with deliberate precision toward the office where the manager had been standing, each step measured, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. My hands clenched around the strap of my bag as I followed, curiosity mingling with caution, my pulse still racing from the unexpected whirlwind that had just swept through the space. Nathan opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking just enough to make the room feel smaller, and his gaze swept over Mr. Whitman, calm yet unyielding, the kind of look that suggested every word, every motion had been considered before he had even arrived. "Make sure the staff is informed that I will be overseeing operations," he said in a voice that left no room for argument, the kind of voice that settled the room into a quiet obedience, and I realized that even though I was uncertain about his motives, the sense of protection that came with his presence was undeniable. Mr. Whitman swallowed hard, his lips moving without sound as he tried to form a reply, but Nathan's attention, sharp and unwavering, held him in place, a silent command that made him nod slowly, as if accepting a reality he had not anticipated. I stepped closer, unsure if I should intervene or merely observe, and Nathan's eyes flicked briefly to mine, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgment that did not require words but conveyed a silent reassurance. The rain outside continued its rhythmic tapping against the windows, a backdrop to the quiet intensity inside, and I found myself focusing on the little details, the way his presence changed the air, the way the space seemed organized and deliberate around him, every object and movement aligned to his authority. He turned toward me then, his gaze softening just slightly, not in a way that suggested affection, but in recognition of my endurance, my willingness to navigate the chaos of the café without complaint, and I felt an unfamiliar sense of being noticed, truly seen for the first time in a long while. "Come with me," he said quietly, indicating the side office, and I hesitated for a moment, then followed, my feet moving cautiously, the wooden floor cool beneath my shoes. Once inside, Nathan leaned against the edge of the desk, the space between us charged not with confrontation but with the palpable understanding that he had arrived to ensure that the day's storm, both literal and figurative, would not break me. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves, and noticed how methodical his movements were, how every gesture carried intent and clarity, and though my heart still raced, I felt a strange, grounding calm settle over me, the kind that comes from knowing that someone of his caliber had assessed the situation and taken responsibility for the outcome. Nathan finally looked directly at me, his blue-gray eyes sharp yet steady, and I realized that in that single glance, more had been communicated than any words could have conveyed, a recognition of my struggle, an unspoken promise that I was no longer alone in facing the storm, and an understanding that my place in this café, in this moment, was now under his watchful, unwavering presence. I followed Nathan Blackwood as he moved toward the back of the café, his steps quiet but deliberate, each one a signal that nothing in this space would escape his notice. I could feel the subtle shift in the air, a heightened awareness that made the ordinary sounds of the coffee machine, the hum of the refrigerator, and the soft tapping of rain against the windows stand out like they were amplified, each movement and each noise suddenly meaningful. I kept my hands close to my chest, bag clutched tightly, and watched as Nathan stopped near the counter, surveying the layout of the café with precise attention, taking in the worn wooden floors, the chipped edges of the tables, and the small details that spoke of months of wear and care, unspoken stories embedded in the space. His eyes met mine briefly, and I saw not judgment but acknowledgment, a silent recognition of the effort I had put into keeping this place functioning, the way I had balanced exhaustion with responsibility, and the quiet determination that had kept me moving forward even when it felt like the world was against me. "I will make sure everything runs smoothly from here," he said, his voice low and calm, resonating through the room, a sound that seemed to command order without raising its volume. I nodded, unsure of what I should say, and he gestured toward the office where Mr. Whitman had been struggling to regain composure, the manager still frozen by the authority that Nathan projected effortlessly. I followed, my steps careful, not wanting to draw attention but wanting to be part of the moment, to understand what was unfolding. Once inside, Nathan moved with efficiency, checking small details, arranging items, and speaking softly to me when necessary, his words deliberate, measured, and meaningful. "You have been doing well under pressure," he remarked, and I felt my chest lift slightly, a warmth spreading through me at being noticed, being recognized, even in such a brief exchange. The rain continued its steady percussion outside, a background rhythm to the quiet but powerful interactions happening in the space, a reminder that the world beyond the café continued unabated, yet within these walls, something had shifted, something that felt like protection and guidance intertwined. Nathan's presence was commanding but not overbearing, his gaze settled on me now and again, offering subtle cues, silent communication that I began to understand, that this was not simply about control, but about observing, ensuring, and guiding without unnecessary interference. I felt a sense of relief mingled with fascination, watching the way he assessed every corner, every interaction, and knowing that in this chaos, he had established a new equilibrium, a sense of safety and order that I had not expected but was quietly grateful for. Every detail, every movement, every glance he gave carried intention and weight, and I realized that being in the presence of someone so attentive and measured created a strange comfort, a calm amid the storm, a clarity in the middle of confusion. And as I stood there, absorbing the rhythm of his controlled movements and subtle commands, I felt a newfound confidence that we could face whatever challenges were yet to come, together in a space that was no longer simply a café, but a place under. The careful and steady guidance of someone who understood what needed to be protected. The afternoon light filtered through the rain-streaked windows, casting soft patterns on the worn wooden floor of the cafe as I followed Nathan Blackwood to the small seating area near the corner, where a few remaining patrons had chosen to linger, quietly sipping their drinks and pretending not to notice the shift in energy that had overtaken the space. Nathan moved with deliberate calm, each step measured and precise, and I felt a mixture of anticipation and unease as I tried to keep pace, my sneakers squeaking lightly against the floorboards. He paused briefly to adjust a stack of menus, his fingers brushing over the edges with an efficiency that suggested not only attention to detail but a quiet appreciation for order and care, and I realized that every action he took seemed to balance control with consideration. My eyes followed him closely, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the way he carried himself with authority without imposing it aggressively, and the way his gaze occasionally flicked to me, offering a silent reassurance that I was being observed but not judged. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, a gentle percussion that mirrored the quiet intensity of the room, and I noticed how the soft light reflected off the polished surfaces of the counter and the tables, highlighting small imperfections that spoke to the life and history of the cafe. Nathan gestured toward a chair, indicating that I should sit, and I did so cautiously, my hands resting on my knees as I tried to steady my racing thoughts. He settled nearby, not too close to feel imposing, but near enough that I could sense the subtle weight of his presence, the careful energy he radiated that seemed to calm the chaos around him. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice low and steady, "you have been managing this place under difficult circumstances, and I want to ensure that your efforts are recognized and supported." The words, simple yet deliberate, carried a gravity that made my heart lift, a reassurance that this was not about control for its own sake, but about establishing a sense of order and protection that would allow me to continue my work without fear. I nodded slowly, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly as I absorbed the calm authority in his tone, and I realized that the storm outside, the pressures of the job, and even the manager's earlier outburst no longer seemed overwhelming with Nathan present, steady and attentive. He leaned back slightly, observing the space with an analytical eye, taking note of small details like the arrangement of chairs, the placement of condiments, and the overall flow of movement, and I found myself learning from him in a quiet, almost imperceptible way, understanding how careful observation and deliberate action could transform a chaotic environment into one that felt manageable, even safe. The soft murmur of conversation, the gentle clink of cups, and the rhythmic tapping of rain on the glass became a backdrop to this new equilibrium, and I felt a sense of grounding settle over me, a quiet confidence that whatever challenges might arise in the coming days, the cafe, and I, would face them under the watchful, steady guidance of someone whose presence brought order, focus, and subtle reassurance in a world that often felt unpredictable and overwhelming. The late afternoon light shifted to a muted gray as the rain eased into a soft drizzle, leaving tiny droplets clinging to the cafe windows, reflecting the fading city lights in delicate patterns. I remained seated in the corner, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, feeling the subtle tremor of adrenaline still coursing through me from the earlier events, while Nathan Blackwood moved methodically through the space, checking details, adjusting items, and speaking quietly to staff in a way that commanded attention without overwhelming anyone. His presence seemed to organize the environment, each word and gesture reinforcing a sense of order and stability that contrasted sharply with the chaos of moments before, and I watched, learning how authority and calm observation could shift the mood of a room without raising a voice or making a demand. Nathan paused near the counter, glancing at me briefly, his blue-gray eyes catching the light and holding mine for a moment long enough to communicate unspoken understanding and reassurance, a recognition of my persistence and diligence, and I felt a flicker of pride mixed with cautious trust, realizing that the acknowledgment itself carried weight beyond words. The manager, who had initially tried to assert control, now moved with tentative cooperation, responding to Nathan's calm guidance and subtle signals, and I noticed how the atmosphere had softened, the tension in the air replaced with a quiet attentiveness, a collective awareness that the cafe had entered a new rhythm under his watchful eye. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth seep into my hands, while Nathan moved to the back of the cafe, checking the seating arrangement, the placement of menus and utensils, each action deliberate and precise, reflecting a mind attuned to detail and care. And I realized that the environment itself seemed to respond to him, the air lighter, the movements of staff more fluid, and the remaining customers more relaxed despite the underlying sense of authority. He stopped briefly to adjust a light fixture, his movements careful, almost tender in contrast to the firmness of his presence, and I found myself observing him closely, noticing the small gestures that conveyed intention, control, and an unspoken promise of safety, a balance between power and consideration that I had not experienced before. Nathan returned to my table, leaning slightly on the edge of the counter, his gaze calm and assessing, offering subtle guidance through expression alone, and I felt the tension ease further, replaced with a growing confidence that the challenges of the cafe, the unpredictable flow of the day, and even the remnants of earlier conflict were manageable with his presence. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional clink of cups, and the gentle tapping of rain against the glass created a soothing backdrop as I took in the scope of what had unfolded, understanding that this moment, this calm authority, and the quiet yet firm guidance from Nathan would shape not only the cafe but my approach to handling pressure, responsibility, and unexpected change in ways I had not anticipated. Each movement, glance, and instruction he offered carried intention, subtly teaching, guiding, and reassuring, and I recognized that in the stillness and rhythm of the moment, the bond of trust and acknowledgment between us had quietly formed, creating a foundation for a day that, though stormed upon, was now firmly anchored in measured control and attentive oversight. The evening grew darker as the soft glow of the streetlights outside filtered through the cafe windows, casting elongated shadows across the floor and reflecting on the polished surfaces of the tables. I stayed close to the counter, watching Nathan Blackwood move with purpose, his presence commanding yet calm, creating a subtle order in the lingering bustle of the few remaining customers and staff. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of rain, grounding me as I observed the deliberate way he organized the space, adjusting chairs, straightening menus, and guiding the staff with quiet precision. Every gesture, every glance, was purposeful, instilling a sense of clarity and focus, and I felt the weight of tension lift incrementally with each measured movement. I found myself noticing the small details, the way Nathan paused briefly to consider the placement of a chair, the careful way he directed the barista to arrange the display, and the attentive way he ensured that every corner of the cafe reflected a calm professionalism. His eyes met mine occasionally, and each time, I felt a subtle reassurance, a recognition of my role, my efforts, and the silent understanding that he was observing without judgment, only guiding and supporting. Outside, the drizzle had slowed to a gentle mist, and the city beyond seemed muted, almost hushed, allowing the quiet authority within the cafe to dominate the space entirely. Nathan spoke softly to me once, pointing out a minor adjustment that could improve efficiency, and I realized that the way he communicated was not about asserting control, but about creating an environment where each decision felt intentional and each movement had meaning. The manager, now subdued and cooperative, moved with careful attention to Nathan's instructions, a silent acknowledgement of his authority, and I noticed how the collective energy of the room shifted, the earlier chaos replaced with a quiet, attentive rhythm. I sipped my tea, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, and I allowed myself to absorb the moment, understanding that this presence, this calm and deliberate guidance, was reshaping not only the physical environment but also the emotional landscape of the cafe. Nathan's proximity and his subtle cues created a sense of security that I had not anticipated, making the once overwhelming space feel manageable and even welcoming. The soft hum of machinery, the distant sound of footsteps from the street outside, and the gentle clinking of cups formed a background that contrasted with the focused energy within, and I began to notice the growing confidence in my own posture, the steadiness in my breathing, and the clarity in my thoughts as I mirrored the calm attentiveness he embodied. Every action he took, from the smallest adjustment of a menu to the direction of a staff member, carried intention and care, and I felt a growing sense of trust, understanding that the rhythm he established was not just about efficiency, but about creating a space where I, and everyone present, could operate with clarity, confidence, and quiet assurance that the cafe, for now, was firmly anchored under his watchful, steady guidance. The café had settled into a quiet rhythm, the fading light outside casting long, soft shadows across the floor, yet a subtle tension lingered beneath the calm, a sense that the day's earlier chaos had not entirely dissipated. I remained close to the counter, observing Nathan Blackwood as he moved with a deliberate, unhurried precision, guiding the remaining staff with subtle gestures and quiet instructions that seemed to organize the space without a word of overt command. Every movement he made was purposeful, each glance carrying unspoken messages that were clear to those who paid attention, and I found myself learning from his example, noticing how attentiveness and calm authority could reshape the environment. Nathan paused briefly near a table where a couple of lingering customers had quietly resumed their conversations, and his presence seemed to subtly shift the atmosphere, a gentle but unmistakable signal that this space now operated under a new order, one marked by quiet control and careful observation. My hands gripped the edge of the counter, the warmth of the ceramic mug grounding me as I absorbed the calm efficiency he embodied, and I realized that the influence he exerted was not simply about direction but about instilling a sense of confidence and stability in everyone present. I followed him instinctively as he moved toward the back corner of the café, where minor adjustments were required, watching how he assessed the layout with a critical but measured eye, considering not only the functional arrangement of furniture and equipment but also the flow of movement and the comfort of those who occupied the space. His occasional glances in my direction carried reassurance, a subtle acknowledgment of my presence and efforts, and I felt a growing sense of being recognized and supported, a quiet validation that my work mattered and was now seen in a broader context. Outside, the drizzle had lightened further, casting a reflective sheen on the sidewalk that mirrored the soft, ambient glow of the streetlights, adding a contemplative layer to the stillness inside. Nathan's methodical movements, the careful attention to small details, and the understated guidance he provided created a pattern that I began to internalize, noticing how order and calm could be maintained through deliberate, thoughtful action rather than force or pressure. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to watch the subtle interplay of gestures, expressions, and silent communication that governed the café now, and I felt a quiet confidence growing within me, a sense that, under Nathan's watchful presence, the space and I were both capable of navigating whatever challenges the evening might yet bring. The soft hum of the espresso machine, the muted clinking of cups, and the distant sound of passing cars outside blended into a harmonious background, emphasizing the newfound equilibrium in the room, a balance of control, attentiveness, and reassurance that left me both reassured and quietly awed by the subtle mastery Nathan displayed in guiding the café through the aftermath of its earlier turmoil. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, the city outside cloaked in the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, while inside the café, the air held a calm intensity that seemed to stretch across every corner. I, Emily Carter, remained near the counter, my hands wrapped around a warm mug, feeling the residual pulse of adrenaline from the earlier chaos slowly ebbing into a focused awareness as Nathan Blackwood moved with deliberate care through the space. Each step he took seemed to reshape the environment, the subtle shifts in posture and gaze creating an unspoken sense of order that the staff and remaining patrons instinctively followed. Nathan paused briefly near the back tables, adjusting the arrangement with a precision that suggested not only attentiveness but an understanding of how even small details could influence the flow and comfort of those within the café. His eyes met mine across the room, steady and assuring, a silent message that my presence was acknowledged and my efforts appreciated, and I felt a warmth settle in my chest, a quiet validation of my role and persistence. The soft hum of the coffee machine, the gentle clink of cups, and the distant rhythm of rain against the windows provided a comforting backdrop, emphasizing the controlled atmosphere Nathan cultivated, a balance of calm authority and careful observation. I followed him as he moved toward the side entrance, noting how his presence seemed to carry a subtle gravity, drawing attention without overt effort, and I became acutely aware of the way he guided the staff through gestures and brief instructions, creating an environment where everyone felt the influence of his oversight without feeling pressured or constrained. A sense of ease settled over me, a recognition that under Nathan's watchful eye, the unpredictability that had defined my day was now tempered by measured action and deliberate observation. He stopped near the front counter, his hands resting lightly on the edge, surveying the space with a practiced attention, and I noticed the way his posture and focus instilled confidence not only in the staff but in myself, reinforcing a quiet determination that I had not felt since the chaos began. The café, once a place of hurried movements and scattered energy, now seemed to breathe with a measured, steady rhythm, every sound, every glance, and every subtle motion aligning with the new order Nathan had established. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth anchor me as I absorbed the controlled flow of activity, understanding that the guidance Nathan provided was more than managerial oversight. It was a demonstration of how deliberate attention, calm assessment, and subtle influence could transform a space, a day, and the people within it into a cohesive, functioning whole. The city outside moved on, indifferent to the quiet revolution occurring within the walls of the café, yet I felt a renewed sense of capability and focus, knowing that with Nathan's presence shaping the rhythm and atmosphere, we were prepared to navigate whatever challenges the night might bring, together under his steady, watchful guidance. The café had finally quieted, the soft ambient glow from the hanging lights mingling with the muted reflections of the streetlights outside, casting a serene, almost cinematic quality over the room. I, Emily Carter, remained near the counter, my hands resting on the warm ceramic of the mug, feeling a sense of calm settle over me, a stark contrast to the flurry of chaos that had defined the afternoon. Nathan Blackwood moved with careful deliberation toward the front of the café, observing the layout and the staff with a meticulous eye, each adjustment purposeful and silent, as if he were orchestrating a symphony of quiet efficiency. I followed him instinctively, noticing how his presence influenced every movement around him, the staff now moving with an awareness that reflected his guidance without needing constant direction. His eyes met mine briefly as he paused, a subtle acknowledgment that went beyond words, a recognition of my resilience, my presence, and the unspoken trust that had formed between us throughout the afternoon. The gentle hum of the espresso machine, the faint clink of cups, and the distant rhythm of cars passing on the wet streets outside created a backdrop to the quiet intensity of the space, emphasizing the controlled energy that Nathan projected effortlessly. He moved toward the back corner, making subtle adjustments to the seating and observing the flow of movement among staff, ensuring that efficiency and comfort coexisted seamlessly, and I marveled at the way each small action carried intentionality, shaping the environment without overt interference. A soft smile flickered across his face, almost imperceptible, as he glanced toward me, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a quiet reassurance that my efforts were seen and appreciated, that in this controlled chaos, there was a guiding presence ensuring that nothing was left to chance. The drizzle outside had slowed further, leaving tiny droplets that reflected the soft glow of the city lights, mirroring the careful attention Nathan gave to every corner of the café, and I felt a newfound sense of focus and capability settle over me. I sipped my tea, breathing in the calm, and allowed myself to absorb the rhythm he had established, understanding that his presence was more than oversight. It was a demonstration of deliberate care, observation, and quiet authority. Every glance, every adjustment, and every subtle instruction reinforced a structure that made the space feel secure, purposeful, and measured. As the night deepened and the city moved on beyond the walls of the café, I realized